You've read this story before, but something was always missing. A quiet question that never left your heart. Not curiosity, but a longing to understand. Tonight, we slow down and sit with that question gently, without rushing, without fear, and without pretending it never mattered. Some stories in the Bible feel unfinished, especially when you've waited a long time for answers in your own life. This is one of them. Not to shock you, not to argue, but to offer clarity, comfort, and a reminder that God never forgets what seems unseen. There are moments when unanswered questions feel heavier than pain itself. Not loud questions, not rebellious ones, but quiet thoughts that rise when everything else is still. You may have carried them for years. You didn't ask them out loud. You didn't want to sound doubtful or ungrateful. So you kept them tucked away, deep inside, hoping they would fade. Many women reach a season in life where they are no longer rushing. The noise has softened. The responsibilities are still there, but the heart has slowed enough to notice what was never resolved. Questions about life. About fairness. About silence. About the parts of Scripture that seem to move on without explaining everything. And maybe you've felt this strange mix of faith and fatigue. You still believe. You still pray. But you're tired of pretending that everything makes sense. Tired of quick answers that don't sit well in your spirit. Tired of feeling like you're the only one who notices what's missing. The story of Cain often feels like that. We are told he had a wife. The Bible does not pause to explain her name, her story, or where she came from. It simply moves forward. And for many, that silence feels uncomfortable. Not because we doubt God, but because we long for understanding. This isn't about arguing theology. It's about the ache that comes when something feels unfinished. When you've lived through your own seasons of waiting and unanswered prayers, silence becomes personal. You've learned that silence can either mean absence, or it can mean something deeper is still forming. Perhaps that's why this question lingers. That he remembers the people who aren't named. That women, especially, are not invisible in his story. If you've ever felt overlooked, unheard, or quietly set aside, this question may feel closer to your heart than you expected. And that's okay. Faith does not require you to shut down your curiosity. Gentle faith allows space for reflection. Tonight, we approach this story slowly. Without pressure. Without judgment. Just with a listening heart. Because sometimes God's comfort is found not in loud explanations, but in calm understanding. Many believers carry a quiet guilt for asking questions. Especially women who are taught that faith means acceptance without reflection. But questioning is not rebellion. It is often the language of someone who cares deeply. You may have asked yourself, why doesn't the Bible explain everything? Or maybe, why does it move past certain people so quickly? These thoughts don't come from disbelief. They come from longing. From wanting to feel included in the story. For women who have spent years waiting, for healing, for answers, for relief, unfinished stories can feel personal. You've lived chapters that never got closure. Prayers that were whispered faithfully but never answered in the way you expected. So when Scripture feels brief or silent, it echoes something familiar. The story of Cain's wife is one of those moments. The Bible introduces her without detail, without backstory, and then continues. And over time, people filled that silence with speculation, debate, and sometimes fear-based explanations. But often, what was missing was gentleness. You are not wrong for wanting clarity. You are not weak for noticing the gaps. God is not threatened by your questions. In fact, Scripture itself shows that God often reveals truths slowly, over generations, not all at once. The early chapters of Genesis were not written to satisfy curiosity, but to establish foundations. They focus on humanity's relationship with God, not exhaustive family records. This doesn't erase the existence of others. It simply means the story had a different purpose. Many women have lived lives where their contributions were assumed, but not recorded. Their presence was essential, but not celebrated. And perhaps that's why the forgotten daughters of Adam and Eve resonate so deeply. You may have felt like one of those daughters. Present, faithful, but unseen. Doing what needed to be done without recognition. Loving without applause. Waiting without reassurance. The Bible's silence here is not a dismissal. It is an invitation to trust that God's story is wider than what is written. That not every name recorded equals value, and not every silence equals absence. If you've ever felt overlooked by people, it can be tempting to believe God overlooks you too. But Scripture consistently shows the opposite. God sees what others miss. He remembers what history forgets. This shared struggle, between belief and weariness, trust and longing, is not something to be ashamed of. It is a sign of deep faith that has endured time, disappointment, and unanswered prayers. You are not alone in this tension. Many faithful hearts have sat where you sit now, quietly wondering, quietly hoping, quietly trusting that God's understanding is bigger than what we can see. When we approach Scripture gently, without forcing it to answer questions it was never meant to address, something shifts. We stop demanding explanations and begin receiving understanding. Genesis was written in a time when family records were not complete biographies. The focus was lineage, not detail. Adam and Eve were told to multiply. This implies sons and daughters, many of them, over long years. Cain's wife did not appear suddenly. She existed within that expanding human family. The Bible does not name every daughter, but it does not deny their existence. Silence is not absence. Often, it is simply selectivity. God chose to highlight certain moments to reveal His nature, not to catalog every life. Throughout Scripture, women appear briefly and yet profoundly. Some are named. Some are not. But God's care is consistent. He sees hearts, not headlines. It's important to remember that ancient storytelling was different from modern expectations. Details we crave today were assumed then. The original audience would not have been confused by Cain having a wife. They understood the context of generations growing over time. This perspective doesn't dismiss your curiosity. It grounds it. It reminds us that faith does not require fear of unanswered questions. God's truth is not fragile. For women who have waited years for clarity in their own lives, this can be comforting. Not everything unfolds at once. Not every answer arrives when we want it. But God is present in the waiting. The forgotten daughters of Adam and Eve represent something deeper. They remind us that God's story has always included women, even when history moved past them quietly. Jesus Himself affirmed this. He noticed women others ignored. He listened when others dismissed. He valued hearts over status. God's nearness is not proven by how much is written about you. It is proven by His presence with you. In your quiet prayers. In your long nights. In your silent endurance. If your life feels like a footnote rather than a headline, remember this: God writes differently than people do. He remembers what the world forgets. Scripture is not incomplete. It is intentional. And within its silences there is room for trust. There is a soft relief that comes when you realize you don't have to force answers anymore. When you allow God to be bigger than your understanding. Perhaps your heart has been tired of holding questions without rest. Tonight you are allowed to set them down gently. Not because they don't matter, but because God already holds them. Healing often begins when we stop demanding certainty and start receiving peace. God does not rush you. He does not shame your wondering. He meets you where you are. Imagine the women in Genesis whose names we don't know. They lived real lives. They loved. They hoped. They trusted. And God was present with them, just as He is with you. Your waiting has not been wasted. Your faith has not been overlooked. God's presence does not depend on visibility. Let your heart breathe here. Let the story settle. You are part of something larger than what you can see. Waiting is often misunderstood. It is not punishment. It is preparation. Not for something you must earn, but for something God is forming within you. The strength you carry now is quieter than before. Less forceful. More grounded. This is not weakness. This is maturity. God often works in silence. Roots grow unseen. Faith deepens without noise. The forgotten daughters remind us that significance is not measured by recognition. God's work is steady, patient, and faithful. You don't need to rush your understanding. Peace will come in time. If tonight brought you comfort, let it linger. You don't need to do anything with it. Just receive it. God is not finished with your story. Even the quiet parts matter. You are seen. You are remembered. And you are not alone. Rest here for a moment. Let faith be gentle again.